handle the truth.
The Denise Simon Experience. The Truth Matrix. Vetting, exposing, drilling down to the truth.
Rolling Thunder, this is Hitman, Seat, over. Hitman, this is Rolling Thunder, Seat out.
The Denise Simon Experience. Exposing politics, lies, demagoguery, spin, fraud.
Grid to suppress, Mike Charlie, 4 tree 5, 9er 2-1. Grid to mark, Mike Charlie, 4-7 tree 9er, 8-9er, out.
Promoting individual situational awareness. Question, probe, notice, ask why.
Mark smoke on the deck, 2 rounds HEPT, gas TOT 5-3.
And now, the Denise Simon Experience.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Denise Simon Experience. In the news, we have, of course, Jeff Sessions, who is no longer in a job. And all we're hearing about now is we're back to the Russia investigation. Gosh, we didn't talk about that for maybe 2 months. But goodness, after the midterms, it took about 90 seconds, and we're back into that topic. So Fred Lucas, who covers the White House, by the way, and writes for the Daily Signal, part of Heritage Foundation, has agreed to join us to have this discussion on Sessions and Mueller and all the machinery that kind of goes around that. So with that, Fred, thanks so much for being with us on the Denise Simon Experience.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I'm of the notion that Jeff Sessions had his resignation letter written for quite some time, and it was just kind of sitting in a file waiting for the right moment. Would that be about a good assumption?
Yeah, and I think that might have been, we don't know for sure, but it's a wager, I guess it might go back as far as May of 2017 when Trump first started bad-mouthing Sessions in public. So, and possibly even before then. I mean, he may have had this animosity before he went public with it, but the president doesn't hold too much in, so
no,
he may have made it public the moment he felt it, so.
Was Jeff Sessions really made for the AG job, for the Department of Justice job?
There's a strong case to be made, I think, and Ann Coulter has made this case, is that he, maybe more than any other Trump cabinet member, really carried out the agenda of the Trump administration. He really laid down the law on the border issues, on the immigration issues. He was against sanctuary cities, cracked down on those to the degree he could without some kind of congressional action. He stepped in to take away grants from certain sanctuary cities. He was strong on. Jeff Sessions was very strong on religious freedom issues. He set up a task force within the administration. Where they really parted ways, the president and the attorney general, was on Sessions' recusal from the Mueller, from the entire Russia case, and that is that's where Sessions felt like he had to get out because he was part of the campaign, and if you remember, the Democrats were really gunning for Sessions because he had and what he says was part of his duty, and I think that was the case, part of his duty as a senator on the Armed Services Committee, which is not that unusual, met with the ambassador from Russia, Kislyak, and Democrats tried to make that a part of the supposed conspiracy. So that's led to Sessions recusing himself entirely from the Russia matter, which eventually led to Rod Rosenstein appointing Mueller, and that's been a big headache for the president. But supposedly we are going to get a report from Mueller before the end of the year.
And we have, somebody like Jerry Nadler who is threatening to subpoena Mueller to get an advance testimony of what Mueller is putting in his report. Is that even feasible?
Well, I think he will try. I believe Mueller does it. The indications are out there. He might want to wrap it up to some degree. There was a lot of speculation going back to late August that he was going to put something out before Labor Day, which would have been the 90 days before the election, sort of what Ken started way back in 1998 with Bill Clinton, put out the Starr report in time to have minimal impact on the election. That's not the case. He waited till, and then we started getting the reports that he's going to put it out sometime after the elections have wrapped up. Democrats, Gerald Nadler in particular, he campaigned actually on having experience looking over impeachment and understanding impeachment, constitutional law, and that. So I think Gerald Nadler really wants to do an impeachment, as do a lot of Democrats in the House, in this new House majority. And he's hoping he'll be able to find something in the Mueller report that will let him do that. My guess is that the Mueller report is going to conclude, from what we know so far at least, that there's no Russia collusion and no obstruction of justice. However, I think the Mueller report's going to come down and possibly use some stern language against against President Trump, maybe perhaps scolding him, saying you should not have done this. This was inappropriate to have the Trump Tower meeting and so forth with that Russian lawyer, but determined that there was nothing clear-cut collusion or obstruction of justice. He'll say there's no clear-cut obstruction of justice, but perhaps he will admonish him for firing Comey in the matter that he did. That's my guess. It'll be a narrative, and ironically, I think it's going to be a narrative somewhat similar to what you saw James Comey give in that July 5th press conference about Hillary Clinton's email. I think it's going to be something that's going to build up, and it's going to give Democrats something to cling to, but it's not going to give them what they want, which is to say that Trump is some sort of criminal.
And you know, the interesting thing is that Adam Schiff took a call from a Ukrainian that said that he had some dirt on the whole thing, and that turned out to be a plot. I would say in that phone call was even worse,
prank,
right?
Yeah, right. I mean, this was, I mean, that if the collusion, if they're going to try to arrest the collusion on a meeting in Trump Tower with Jared and Don Jr. and a Russian lawyer, that's not going to go anywhere. I mean, it's just a very weak case. It is the only morsel that even comes close to collusion, but it's not enough to, to make this case that was, first of all, that was not illegal. Nothing came out of it. What would be collusion is if Trump was either involved or had knowledge that Russians did the hacking and so forth, which was, of course, that would be a criminal act. And if he had knowledge of that, there doesn't seem to be any type of any type of evidence of that.
Indicator,
remember,
right.
Mueller has put out, has indicted 20-something Russian individuals or entities. Each one of those indictments, he explained that there was no evidence that Americans or American campaign operatives were involved or cooperating with these Russians.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're speaking with Fred Lucas with Heritage/Daily Signal, who's on the White House beat. Slippery fellow you are, too. Been trying to get you on for several days, but that's a topic for another day. When it comes to Fusion GPS, though, I would say maybe we ought to be having some real conversations about what the FBI and the Justice Department were doing at the time, correct?
Yeah, and I think that's another area where Jeff Sessions was very strong on the president's policy in terms of cracking down on immigration and being a strong advocate on religious freedom. Jeff Sessions was very, very reluctant to really go after, I think, some problems within his department itself, and possibly that might be an issue that Jeff Sessions has been in Washington for a really long time, and maybe sort of more of an institutionalist, and wants to give too much of a benefit of the doubt to these bureaucracies like the FBI, like the Justice Department, where you've had where they basically worked and established used opposition research to justify getting a FISA warrant against Carter Page, which led to this whole investigation to start with.
Fred, why didn't Jeff Sessions do anything about Bruce Orr? Is he still on the payroll of the Department of Justice?
Actually, that is something I should. That is a good question. I'm not even sure where that stands. I know most of those people have been cleared out. I mean, for Andrew McCabe and so forth, Peter Strzok, Lisa Page are gone, but it is and Lisa Page seems to have turned on Peter Strzok as far as giving some secret test or confidential testimony to the Intel committee. But Bruce Orr, that's sort of hanging out there, I think.
Yes, and so if you want to talk about a conflict of interest, that's huge with his wife.
Right. Yeah, right. His wife working with Fusion GPS, and I think we might see the acting Attorney General Matt Whitaker. I think he will address these things, particularly in an acting role. I think is a good position to be in for house cleaning because he's going to be essentially a placeholder until the new long-term Attorney General comes in. So if you're in an acting role, you're sort of in a good position to clean house and not worry about the hard feelings that might be left over the long term. And when a new Attorney General comes in, maybe Chris Christie, maybe Alex Acosta, whoever it might be, that's something that's they're not going to have to deal with quite as much. And Matt Whitaker, he's under a lot of attacks from the left right now.
Oh yeah.
But I mean, he's got a very good, solid record. He had a great record as a U.S. attorney in Iowa during the Bush administration. He was also he ran a government ethics group. It's called the Foundation for Accountability and Civic Trust. He was the first executive director of that organization, and that was a watchdog group. They went after Republicans and Democrats. And what I would also say is, and on various ethics things, that they would ask for ethics investigations into members of Congress. They would get FOIA requests, expose documents sometimes. Now, and another thing, I do want to say this about the left is dwelling, and much of the media is dwelling on a comment he made when he was a paid contributor to CNN. CNN was paying him to give legal opinions, and at one point he gave a legal opinion that he could see a scenario where Trump would appoint an attorney general that would cut off funding to the Mueller probe. One thing I would have to say to that, to people who are so certain that means Whitaker's going to come in and shut the Mueller probe down, is that, and claiming that would be obstruction of justice, is that if you're planning a conspiracy to obstruct justice, I suppose the first thing you're going to do is announce that plan on CNN. I mean,
is that snarky? Are you being snarky?
Okay, yes.
Snarky Fred.
I mean, because that's basically, I mean, the rationale to saying that this is proof that he's going to, because of something he said on CNN.
Yeah, that's blood in the water.
That he's going to shut down the Mueller probe.
That's chumming for CNN.
Right. I mean, so yes, right. I mean, it's clear. I mean, it's most likely he would not do that, particularly if Mueller's close to wrapping up anyway, which is most of the indicators are out there that he is. And also add this, I mean, historically, there's always talk, will Trump fire Mueller? Will Trump fire Mueller? historically, well, what if Trump did? I mean, Nixon had Archibald Cox fired, and then Leon Jaworski just took over the investigations. you
well, it still didn't end well for
prosecutor,
Nixon, though, either.
Right. Yeah, and that didn't work out for him. So,
well, let me ask you this, Fred. Is Whitaker going to take over, or has he officially taken over the Mueller team from Rosenstein, or no?
Yes.
He has.
Yes, he has. You're right. Right, because there was no reason for the Attorney General not to oversee that investigation or oversee Mueller's investigation without a conflict of interest. And there's no Democrats are saying he has a conflict because of comments he made on CNN. That's not a conflict of interest. He has no legal conflict of interest. If anybody does have a conflict of interest, it would be Rosenstein because of the issues with Comey's firing. If presuming, based on the media reports, presuming the Comey firing was a subject of Mueller's probe, it was Rosenstein that wrote the memo recommending the Trump fire Comey.
I'm guessing that Rosenstein's good with Whitaker taking this over. So, Rosenstein would probably like to go on to some other things and not to be babysitting this entire Mueller team, correct? Because, right now everybody loves to hate Rod Rosenstein.
That might be true. That's not really clear. Rosenstein has made public comments supportive of Whitaker. Whether that's just a political or not, I'm not sure. Or if he feels like he lost this football, I don't know. I think I'm sure he is tired to some degree of being in the spotlight. But on the other hand, there is a suspicion that Rosenstein is, part of that permanent Washington bureaucracy that is out to get Trump. Whether that's true or not, I don't know, or whether he was joking when he apparently made the comment about wearing a wire and so forth.
Yeah, we out here kind of get these snippets that there was a heated argument. Rosenstein, somebody wasn't in the room, somebody was in the room, right. It was sarcastic, it was mad, it was this, it was that. We don't have the context of how that whole thing came down either. And then Rosenstein's supposed to give some testimony, and that's been delayed, and it's this and it's that, and it's this and it's that. But I would say that Rosenstein here at this point appears, operative word is appears, to be not a target of the Trump White House. In other words, that they've kind of called, a timeout, correct?
Yeah, it does seem that way. There was a meeting between the two right after that New York Times story came out with the big flashy headline that Rosenstein wanted to wiretap Trump. But after that, the Trump said he has no intention of firing Rosenstein. So it appears he's in for now. There's a little bit of speculation on the day that Sessions was fired that Rosenstein might be next, but so far we haven't seen that.
Yeah, that would pour an awful lot of gasoline on the fire, wouldn't it?
Right. And but I think right now Democrats in the House, they're going to use this House majority to investigate whatever they can investigate.
Let me ask you this bizarre question. In your travels on the Hill and in the White House and whatnot, why don't we have any kind of a report from Huber?
That is good. Yeah. The Utah.
John. What was it? John Huber.
Was, Right. Well, he was working on working along with the Inspector General Horowitz, but the IG put out a report separately with they didn't have Hoover's name on it at all, John Hoover's name on it at all. So that's interesting. I've heard some speculation up here, but it's mostly just that from sources that he is going to be coming out with something, but he was biding his time until after the election.
So, everything's about timing, isn't it?
I don't know if he's going to go into early next year, or that is something we might see Matt Whitaker do, which Jeff Sessions did not do, and that's actually appoint a special prosecutor, and he could actually move Hoover into that role as a special prosecutor, as opposed to, because right now Hoover's sort of doing it as a part-time situation, splitting his time between that and U.S. Attorney. If he moved him into something akin to, and this is going back a long way, but what Patrick Fitzgerald did back during the Valerie Plame situation, he was a U.S. Attorney out of Illinois, but he was asked to come to Washington to serve for time on that one specific case as the prosecutor and special prosecutor in the Valerie Plame case. That's something they could do with Hoover, and that would be technically, and I'm getting technical here, but there is a difference between a special counsel and a special prosecutor.
Right.
Yeah, a special prosecutor would be somebody who works within the Justice Department, whereas a special counsel is someone who is
outside, independent,
like Mueller, who's pulled in from outside. So.
Well, I see media trying to kind of continue to add fuel to this fire, and then especially how it's escalated here since, the Democrats are taking control of power again in the House, and yet, we hear about this impeachment nonsense, but now that the Republicans have got higher power in the Senate, this tells me that we are, as of today, probably in a true lame duck condition, correct?
Yeah, I don't think a lot's going to get done in the next 2 years. It's going to just be a endless cycle of running, living from the one election cycle to the next. To some degree, maybe that's gridlock can be a good thing. Actually, from a conservative perspective, you don't want government doing too much.
Exactly right. I was like, maybe I'm cool with all this.
Right. And also, I think there's a case to be made that Trump can still get a lot of judges through with this increased Senate majority. So that's going to be good. Where he's going to have issues, I think, is obviously getting funding for the wall, getting any immigration legislation passed. If you think he had a hard time with that, with a full Republican Congress, he's certainly not going to get any immigration legislation passed in the Democratic House.
No.
Yeah.
We'll be having this same discussion on immigration 10 years from now.
Kind of looks like it, and the and the ship has sailed. You mentioned Obamacare. That died with the reform effort in 2017.
And McCain.
So, yes, but they did get rid of the individual mandate in the tax reform bill. So that was significant.
Thank you, Mr. Fred Lucas. I'm going to kind of keep checking on you. You need to keep writing because we need to see where all this is going to go and what all the scuttlebutt is between the Hill and the Capitol. So thank you, Mr. Fred Lucas.
That's the deal. I will keep writing.
Yes, sir. There's more coming your way, ladies and gentlemen. Stay with us.
About to join Don Newen, co-host of Cowboy Logic Radio, and Denise Simon, host of the Denise Simon Experience, for a weekly situation report, or SITREP. 18 hours a day, Denise Simon lives her life as an intel analyst. 18 hours a day, Don Newen lives his life in the world of rock and roll. 1 hour each day, Newen receives a daily SITREP from Simon. Welcome to the Drive Time Situation Report. Fasten your seatbelt. You're now in Don Newen's car, and he is calling in for his SITREP.
Check the Talk America Radio schedules for showtimes at talkamericaradio.us.
Let me talk to you, black people. When you vote for blacks and put them in office under the banner of the Democrat Party, please explain to me what black people get as a result. This was not a nap that we have been taking. We are in a coma. You know what the interesting thing about pensions is? That's today's money given to people who ain't doing nothing for you today. Get off that black Democrat tit that they've been sucking on. Your country is being stolen from you, and the promise is being stolen from your children, and they're telling you it's all right while the rest of the world is trying to lap us. Well, why are we doing so poorly? 2 words: teachers' unions. Are you kidding me?
Black Man Thinking, Monday nights, 9 p.m. Hi, this is Donna Fiducia, co-host of Cowboy Logic Radio. For 28 years, I was in the mainstream media, most recently as an anchor at the Fox News Channel. No more. Ladies and gentlemen, the mainstream media has completely failed the American people. Radio networks like Talk America Radio will not fail you. Radio shows like Cowboy Logic Radio will not fail you. Check out the entire roster of over 60 weekly radio shows by visiting talkamericaradio.us. That's talkamericaradio.us.
TalkAmericaRadio.us.
Thanks, ladies and gentlemen, for staying with us here on the Denise Simon Experience. I've got Rich Stayskal with us, who is active duty, and he's got a very interesting case. We have kind of a mutual friend that introduced us, and we're actually going to talk about something in the military called the Ferris Doctrine, which is affecting Rich, and gosh, Rich, I'm going to say probably thousands and thousands of others just like you in some form or fashion. But Rich, thanks so much for being on the Denise Simon Experience.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you very much for having me and hearing my story.
You know, kind of set it up here for the listeners. You have been diagnosed with metastasized cancer, correct?
Yes.
And this actually, your diagnosis actually happened in 2017. Did I get that right?
Yes, last year, January 2017.
Okay, so what did you do? You went to a normal military hospital, not to be confused with the VA, because you didn't go to the VA, correct?
No. I went in January 2017. I went to Womack Army Hospital in Fort Bragg, and I was just simply doing a physical to make sure that I was healthy, making sure that there was nothing wrong with me. Because I had previously been shot in my lung, I had to have a CT scan of my lungs to make sure that I was fit for duty. Well, what had happened was they told me that I was good, cleared my physical, and nobody ever told me about the tumor that I had on my lung.
And so you went on with your normal, duty roster and all those other kinds of things. And then what happened, Rich?
Around probably May or so, I started just kind of having trouble breathing. I was wheezing, coughing. I couldn't, nothing felt right. So I ended up in the ER once at Womack Hospital, and they diagnosed me with walking pneumonia. I did some breathing tests. I even took an ambulance trip there, and then they sent me home. A week later, I ended up at the hospital out in town. Same thing. This time I completely passed out. The doctor my wife went and got the doctor. The doctor had to get me to wake up. They walked me around. They said everything was just not looking right. Nothing made sense. Sent me on my way. shortly after that, I started bleeding. I started coughing up blood out of my throat. Just felt like I was drowning. I couldn't sleep because I was just swallowing blood. Ended up I had an appointment for pulmonology on WOMAC, but I was about 30 days out, and new patients are not a priority, so you have to wait longer. So in the meantime, I kept calling. I called TRICARE. I called the hospital, begging them to let me be seen. I just nothing was right. And they kept getting told, you got to wait. Just nothing you can do. You just got to sit here and wait. Well, finally, my commander got me released, and I went out in town. But by the time TRICARE and the hospital released the paperwork, I was about a month anyways. But I went out in town, did a breathing test. Doctor asked me, the last question was, have you been bleeding? I said, yes. He said, go downstairs right now, do a CT scan. I did one. He said he'd be in contact. A couple days later, called me, says you need to come in for a biopsy as fast as possible. About 2-3 days later, I was in for a biopsy. And when I woke up, he was explaining to my wife and myself that I had stage 3A lung cancer.
And so WOMAC, this military hospital, had more than one opportunity with your visits there to take your case, I guess, more seriously, or to specialists. So these months wouldn't have passed that they could have caught this thing. So it wasn't just a one-off; it was a 3 or 4 off. Correct?
Absolutely, yeah. The doctors even, they knew the tumor was there in January. It was, the doctors out in town asked, they're like, why weren't you taking care of this sooner? And nobody told me. Nobody absolutely told me at all.
So, Rich, is this negligence? Is this malfeasance, or is this kind of all of that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's all of it. It's just it's gross medical malpractice is what it is. I mean, somebody knew about it, blatantly knew about it. They found it. Just nobody said anything. They let me go 6 months untreated from a tumor that was pretty much isolated in my lung to it growing and spreading into my throat and causing me to bleed and hit my system and just spread.
So what's the prognosis today?
Today, the prognosis is I'm stage 4, terminally ill.
And are you receiving any kind of treatment at all, or going through any kind of medical procedures?
Yes, absolutely. I receive treatment right now. I'm currently on a chemo pill right now that I take twice a day. I have a tumor in my spleen that's been growing and won't go away. So I'm about to do a radiation treatment called SBRT, and it's basically high dose radiation that I get about every couple of days or so. It takes about 30 to 45 minutes of radiation.
Now, is this being done through a military hospital, or are you seeking private care on this?
No, absolutely not. All private care from pretty much there on out. I've gone back to just kind of give courtesy and say, hey, this is what I'm doing, but I do not receive care on post at all.
Now, for the sake of the listeners, Rich had asked me to talk to his lawyer, which I did today, and she's quite the firebrand. And what I find particularly interesting for context is that, Rich, you and your lawyer are suing the military, which is very different because this is a military hospital and not a VA hospital. So there's a big distinction there, correct?
Yes, absolutely.
And what you are suing for is a monetary sum for malpractice and malfeasance, correct?
Yes.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, the reason we have this talk with Rich is because there is something out there that's, I think was the mid-1950s there, Rich, correct, called the Ferris Doctrine?
Yes, absolutely.
Which says that active military cannot sue the military, period. End of report, no exceptions.
Yeah, but that's not the way that the doctrine was intended to be written or interpreted, I should say.
So in a little poking around and asking questions of your lawyer, she actually offered me a job today with her law firm because of the questions I was asking her. But yeah. What is particularly interesting is you are by far not the first case, but you are by far not the last one either. There is a case that I think has been accepted to be heard by the Supreme Court by a military widower whose wife died because they allowed her to bleed out after delivering a baby at a military hospital. And that particular case, I think, is actually being heard. And your case is I think, was denied in one court, so it's going through another court, correct?
Yes, absolutely. That is correct.
Rich, I don't even know how you and your family are handling all this, but I would say that there's two words I have to throw out here, and then you need to help me with this, and certainly the listeners, and that is moral and ethical responsibility. What say you?
Absolutely. I give the analogy. When we go overseas and we go and people ask us to go fight wars and do the things that nobody wants to talk about, they ask us to do awful things, but still have those same values, or still the same morals, the same ethics while doing things. We weren't doing any of that. We were, I scheduled an appointment. I walked in there free, no care in the world, just getting checked up, expecting that when I enlisted and I joined, that they said, we will provide you medical care and we will take care of you while you do a job for us. So I understood that was an agreement. Well, that agreement was broken when a doctor chose not to follow up and tell me, hey, you have a serious issue going on in your lungs that needs to be addressed. They just pushed it to the side and let me go about my business as if nothing was wrong. And now the negative impact that it's having on myself, my wife, my wife and my kids, it's unfathomable to think that somebody out there, and I'm sure there's more, there absolutely is more, that somebody is just absolutely okay with that. And what's upsetting is our government is saying we are absolutely okay with that too. And our politicians are not standing up and doing anything about it. And so in my eyes, they are completely okay with the lack of care for active duty military in their lives.
Rich, this is really quite as twisted as it can possibly be. I'm the daughter of a Marine, so I have a little bit of anger, and rightly so, in all of this. But back in 2002, and this is for the sake of the listeners, 2002, there was a piece of legislation that was actually introduced in the Senate Judiciary Committee, and a hearing that went along with it. It was a 137-page piece of legislation to fix the Ferris Doctrine. So there's quite the hearing. There were, the Judiciary Committee's got, I think, 12 or 14 people on it, bipartisan. And Rich, they just dropped it on the floor. I mean, it's kind of like, okay, it was like a gesture. We'll hear it 16 years ago, but that's it. And not one person that I have seen since has even attempted to fix this Ferris Doctrine. Have you?
Actually, in 2008, believe it or not, there was a young Marine who, when he enlisted, they noticed a suspicious skin tag or something on his butt. They cleared him, let him go. When he went to Afghanistan in 2008, it had grown and spread, and the doctors had said, well, when you get back, we'll check this out. He ended up with stage 4 cancer, a skin cancer. He died. They actually filmed it on a news TV on CBS Byron Pitts, they filmed him pretty much dying on TV. His family took that to court, and they still said no. That they watched a man die on TV after gross negligence, and it's sickening. It was just awful that because nobody listened then, nobody listened before, and before that I'm now in this situation. And what's upsetting even more is that, people are like, oh, you can't challenge the government. You can't challenge the government. Who says? Why? How did this country become the country it is without challenging the things that are morally and ethically wrong? And it's unfathomable that people are terrified of what's going to happen. These are our sons and our daughters. What's going to happen when that E5, that sergeant now in the military goes, that doesn't pertain to me. Sorry, it's bad luck. Well, what happens when he grows up and he has his kids that enlist in the military? Mm-hmm. What about then? And that's what I'm asking people to realize is think about not just your generation, but the generations that you are raising right now, because it's going to continue if it's not stopped now. I'm not asking for the fares to be abolished and taken away. It applies a purpose. I'm asking it to be revised and revisited and looked at to where we can have equal rights, because that's really what it's at right now, is that active duty service members are not equally treated. We don't have the same rights as any other civilian to seek recourse when somebody practices bad medicine on you. And I don't understand how we are less than any other person in this country right now. But we are.
Yeah, you are. After speaking with your lawyer, Rich, I was really kind of struck of the kind of monies that we spend all over this globe. I mean, we're giving money to the Taliban. We have these victims funds. That how much money these victims get of, these mass shootings we have is a subjective number. I mean, there's virtually a fund at Treasury just for this kind of thing. So this person over here may get 10 million, but this person over there may not get anything. So
absolutely.
I mean, I'm seeing this all over the place now. Rich, in your heart of hearts, is there a cause, do you think, on where this cancer came from? Because you don't have your smoking, cigarettes type of cancer, correct?
No, the closest I could say is, maybe burn pits and stuff like that, and that's been addressed. But, other than that, no, we don't have a clue.
The burn pits have been the point of some discussion, but there was really no resolution to those burn pits in Afghanistan, were there?
No, absolutely. And then it's another issue. Since becoming sick, I read and I read. I sit up at night because I can't sleep and I read. And, they'll talk about studies that scientists or doctors are already doing that our generations are going to have nothing but bronchial problems. We're going to continue to have issues with our health because of this. We've seen it before, the Agent Orange, and that was, nobody wanted to talk about that. Nobody, it didn't happen. It didn't, oh, no way. There's no way. Well, it's going to be the same cycle again. And that's, it's just like everything else. Everything repeats itself until somebody stands up and says, enough is enough. We join and we enlist to do the things that our country asks of us, but I didn't ask to have medical malpractice. I didn't ask for somebody to not do their job and take care of me when they said that they would.
More than once, I might add. More than once. Because you went there several times.
More than once.
And did your file, did your medical file, I mean, after you went and had this, routine checkup, for, screening, did your file not follow you back into duty?
So that's the thing. That's an interesting topic there. It wasn't even, I wouldn't even consider it a routine checkup. Anyways, I was specifically told to go have my chest looked at. This wasn't like, oh, I'm just going in for a normal checkup. No, this was like, Sergeant First Class Stayskal, you will go get this done or you will not continue training. You have to go do this. So I made the appointment, or the appointment was made. I went in there and did it. And yes, absolutely. That packet had to continue on to somebody else who cleared my physical, who said, Sergeant First Class, everything checks out. You are good. Continue. So there's multiple places of issue.
Yes.
But it all starts with the doctor who said, I'm not going to tell anybody about this guy's tumor in his chest.
So how are you and your family handling this today? I mean,
you know, when I first was diagnosed with cancer, somebody told me just take it one day at a time. And I, you know, being as stubborn as I was like, that's ridiculous. You know, why do I listen to that? And, you know, honestly, I've come to one day at a time. I look at things differently. I appreciate things more. You know, I try not to take any small thing that my kids do for granted. You know, of course I'm still human. You know, I'm trying to be a better husband and a better father. But we're trying to have fun. We're trying to live like we should, and you know, and trust in the medical care that I have now. You know, I don't want to spend my remaining days looking back too much.
No, I understand that for sure. Are you active duty today?
I am still active duty. So like I said, you know, I hear the worries of the other active duty men and women that are out there that are nervous about saying something. But I try to let them know repeatedly, you know, I am still active duty right now. And I tell my chain of command everything I'm doing, and I've asked them for their support, and I've gotten nothing but that. You're really,
you got a 2-track service going here. You realize that you know, you are servicing those that are active duty today to tell them, hey, you know, you need to ask some harder questions. You need to take your file and go get a second opinion, you know, all these kinds of things. I mean, so you're sounding the clarion call, correct?
Yes.
Now, for the listeners, what do we need to do? Do we need to get on the phone, and do we need to start yelling and screaming at people and wherever it is?
Well, right now I've been, you know, encouraging people to reach out to their local representatives, and, you know, start bringing up the issue and saying, hey, you know, there's a problem with the Ferris Doctrine, and our men and women aren't being treated fairly. I'm asking them to contact Natalie at 813-WHISTLE, and if they have any way they think they can support, they can call her and talk to her. There's also a website called ferrisdoctrine.com, and they can go on there, and if they want to do the easy route, that's it right there. Everything's on that page, the ferrisdoctrine.com. They can go in there. We're asking people to sign a petition, and there's a place in there that they can look up their local representatives and call. They can email them. Like I said, there's numerous ways to help, but the first step is just saying, I'm going to do it, and at least, you know, following through. Unfortunately, this is something, you know, like I said, the worry is people that are service members that are active duty,
mm-hmm.
But this is an issue that pertains to them. That's why I'm asking them to step up and not be afraid, because it's about them right now, you know, and it's going to be about their kids in the future. And if they just continue to turn a blind eye, it may come back on them. And I don't want that to happen to anybody anymore.
Do we know for sure if this other case has been accepted by the Supreme Court, Rich?
No.
I don't either. I know that it was written about last month, but I don't know if the Supreme Court, I think October the 1st was their first day of session. So I'll have to kind of look a little bit deeper to see if they've accepted. You know, what's particularly interesting is Justice Scalia wrote about the Ferris Doctrine and how stupid it was, I think back in 1985 or 1987. So it's not the
Absolutely.
first time that it has come up before at least one of those judges on the bench.
Absolutely. It's been brought up several times, just as you said earlier. It's baffling. Why hasn't it been fixed when so many people have brought it up? So many people have talked about it. You know, what's stopping it? Who's stopping it? That's the question. You know, I'd like to know.
Well, the other thing is that if for nothing else, to allow you to seek some unusual medical procedures outside of a military hospital. In other words, go to a cancer specialist at Moffitt in Tampa or something and try some of these trial things, if for nothing else. I mean, you've got some medical options here that you're almost being prevented from seeking, correct?
Well, I'm being able to. I guess my point is that I'm being supported to go to some of those hospitals and everything, but I could have avoided a lot of these hospital trips. Mm-hmm. I could have avoided a lot of this. The potential of that cancer being taken care of in a different route and a different manner was absolutely great. But I was not given that opportunity and that option. Mm-hmm. It was taken from me.
Yeah, it's stolen from you.
Absolutely. And in a sense, my life is being stolen from me because somebody just didn't want to do their job.
Now you're a Army Green Beret, is that correct?
Yes.
And how long have you been in?
I'm sitting right at about 16 and a half years. Unfortunately, I had 15 more planned out. I was about to attend the warrant officer course when I found out, and go back to a team and be a warrant officer and lead Green Berets.
I don't even, for somebody who's been part of structure and, has given so many years of service, that you've got things planned out that, you've got a short time, correct?
Yes.
Ladies and gentlemen, please go to ferrisdoctrine.com. I wish I was talking to you, Rich, for several other reasons, but if for nothing else, at least we can continue this dialogue. For people like you and so many others. We don't even know what the so many others are. There could be thousands, there could be 10,000s, correct?
Absolutely. One last thing I'd like to say is, I've come really into loving this quote that I've heard and found from George Washington, and it simply says, "Just because one puts on a uniform does not mean he cedes being a civilian."
Indeed, so. The recoil just kind of goes on forever, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Godspeed to you, and I hope that you are doing this one day at a time, as you say that you are, and what days you have in front of you and your family that you certainly take advantage of. But we'll work pretty hard to address those others that are out there just like you that are victims of the Ferris Doctrine. I go back to the whole thing of ethical and moral responsibility. You guys are practicing it, giving your service to the country and the rest of the world, and yet it's not coming back. Rich, thanks for being with us and explaining all of this to us. Through our mutual friends here, I'm going to keep kind of checking on you too. So thanks for being with us and explaining it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me and listening.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, there's more coming your way, so make sure that you stay with us.
The truth. The Denise Simon Experience. The Truth Matrix. Vetting, exposing, drilling down to the truth.
Rolling Thunder, this is Hitman. Seat over. Hitman, this is Rolling Thunder. Seat out.
The Denise Simon Experience. Exposing politics, lies, demagoguery, spin, fraud.
Grid to suppress, Mike Charlie, 4 tree 5, 9er 2-1. Grid to mark, Mike Charlie, 4-7 tree 9er, 8-9er, out.
Promoting individual situational awareness. Question, probe, notice, ask why.
Mark smoke on the deck, 2 rounds AGPT, gas TOT 5-3.
And now, the Denise
Thanks, ladies and gentlemen, for hanging with us here on the Denise Simon Experience. I want you to know I have a white man on with us who Don Lemon now says is a threat to the United States. Seton Motley is a friend.
I have a
quasi
travel
neighbor.
ban in place, but it's self-imposed. Go ahead.
Self-imposed travel ban. And Seton runs. He's the founder of lessgovernment.org. Is it .org? Yes,
it's exactly right. The suffix of the nonprofit. Yes.
Okay. Well, welcome, Seton, and
thank you.
You know, I'm happy that you have written about China. I noticed that National Review has written about China. I've written about China so many times I can't even stand it any longer. So I was hoping that somebody else would kind of pick up the baton, and you did. But your particular bent on China, which you can find, ladies and gentlemen, over at Red State, because he made a big contribution over there. And that is that the Defense Department seems to be wanting to outsource, and they have been outsourcing some of their backups and some of their firewalls and protections to non-government cyber experts kind of thing. And they keep putting things out. They keep, we got Amazon, Jeffrey Bezos, which is, also happens to own the Washington Post. And I don't think that's a very good idea, doing our cloud services with them through the Department of Defense. But then I digress. But I guess the big question here is, one of the most secure places we have is NSA. Why are we not expanding NSA so the Defense Department could be co-locating with NSA? Or is that just a logical... help me out, Seton.
Well, here's the thing. Okay, let me give a brief history. The JEDI, it stands for something, a joint... I always get lost in acronym land in D.C. But anyway, it's the Defense Department is looking to outsource its cloud computing backup for everything it's doing. It seems to want to do a similar source. Now, when this process first started, Amazon, for some unknown reason, had an inside track to the job. Well, you just do a little research, and you come to find that Barack Obama's Defense Department had hired a bunch of ex-Amazon employees and put them in charge of the JEDI contracting process. And
wait. Did you know that Jeffrey Bezos lives on the same street, owns a house on the same street as Barack Obama as we speak?
Which is amazing, because Barack Obama's never had a job.
That's a sidebar. Keep going.
Yes. So Barack Obama hired all these ex-Amazon employees who then draft the contractor description in such a way that only Amazon can meet it. So, thankfully, the Trump administration comes in, he appointed an IG to look at the process, and in like 2 days he went, yeah, this isn't right, we're basically pulling back and starting over. So that was good. So now we're in this bidding process. Meanwhile, of course, Amazon's still in the process.
And then we had Google.
Well, Google employees, Google was in the bidding. Google employees staged a mutiny and said, we don't want to be helping the U.S. war machine, and we don't want our company sullying its reputation by working with the Defense Department. Oh, but yes, let's go back for our 21st year of bending over for the communist Chinese. That we can do. That's no problem. That doesn't sully our brand's good name. The Microsoft employees also wrote an open letter to their bosses saying, we don't want to be part of this either after Google quit. Google did pull out of the bidding process. But
Google beat out IBM and then bailed on the contract.
Well, they didn't get the contract. They didn't beat anybody. This particular contract, nobody's gotten it yet. It's still open for bid. So anyway, that's still open for bid. It's still going. So Microsoft is still in it, even though their employees wrote a letter on Medium.com. So anyway, Amazon's still in the running, and there are several issues I have with. Well, first of all, I don't think any one company should get the whole damn thing. That makes no sense.
Exactly.
You need backups, and you don't have backups if one company's provide anyway. So one of the problems Amazon has is they go offline a lot. Not just the retail, not just the Amazon retail site, but their Amazon Web Services go offline a lot. And additionally, there was a story in Bloomberg late last week about China planting spy chips on Amazon and Apple products. And now, I said it in the piece, and I'll say it here, Amazon and Apple both vociferously said that did not happen. They've been going after Bloomberg to retract the story. Bloomberg, as of my last reading, had not retracted the story. I'm in the uncomfortable position of having to decide who to believe, big tech or the media. So I'm in no man's land on that. So anyway, but that made me think, okay, how deeply enmeshed in China is Amazon? So I started looking around, and sure enough, they're deeply enmeshed in China. They have a cloud computing deal that they partnered with a Chinese government company on in China. They're doing all kinds of retail in China. As we know, it's not free entry into the Chinese marketplace. The Chinese government extracts things from you. They extract IP handovers. They extract tech handovers. They extract all kinds of things that we don't even know about. And these guys are over a barrel with China, not like Apple is. I mean, Apple's entire manufacturing, I think, is in China. So they're completely screwed in about 5 years when China really goes to town. But anyway, I digress. Amazon's too enmeshed in China for me to feel comfortable saying, hey, Department of Defense, give them all your secrets. I'm not comfortable with that.
Well, I'm going to do a story topper, I think, and this ought to raise some eyebrows, so I'm glad we're actually talking about what China, I mean, they're clearly not friends, but yet Don Lemon can't seem to, never mind. There was a report that came out between the U.S. War College and Tel Aviv University. And in this report, China is actually siphoning off internet traffic in Asia, all of Asia, and they're taking it, they're copying it, so there's a 15-20 minute delay, and then they're putting it back on the broadband pipes. So I said, what? I mean, everything travels through the internet. Everything.
Yeah, they're probably scanning it for stuff they don't want to get through to their citizens.
Well, no. This is trade. This is, I mean, it's just anything that goes on the internet. So I reached out.
Tough to issue a stock purchase with that going on.
So I reached out to one of the authors, Dr. Chris Demchek, who is with the War College, United States Naval War College, and I said, hey, will you do an interview on this? And he said, well, thank you for the invitation, but I must decline. So I thought, well, somebody's probably said you need to shut up about this after this report went out. My whole point with this is that I just don't think we have a full handle on what in the world China is actually doing to not only the United States, but to any of our allies. And we can't seem to get anybody in Congress to determine if any of this is beginning to cross the line to an act of war. Can we?
Well, I'm totally with you. And China's been throwing around money in Washington for decades. I mean, if you'll remember, the 1996 Bill Clinton reelect had millions of dollars funneled in from the Chinese. Remember that? Charlie Tree and
yeah.
And we gave them secrets, nuclear secrets from a base in Arizona. Remember that? So the Chinese, the communists love those 10-year plans and 50-year plans, and China's got a 50-year plan. It's 2030 to dominate the world.
Correct.
And they're on schedule. I mean, I'm constantly watching China, reminded of the Vladimir Lenin line. Vladimir Lenin, of course, the Russian who basically was responsible for the execution of the last czars in Russia to incept the Soviet Revolution in Russia. And he said the capitalists will sell us the rope with which we will hang them. And that's China. That's what's happening here. And, in looking this up, I thought, I thought it was a little more than this. They only own $1.2 trillion of our debt. I thought it was a little more than that. That's relatively reassuring. That was the only reassuring thing I found in all my research for this piece. But they've spent billions of dollars they dumped them into colleges to set up pro-China teaching programs. They're buying politicians going back to Clinton's in the 90s. They're even buying up now because, of course, they're government subsidized. So they're coming in and underbidding all our companies and buying up passenger rail routes, train routes in America. I mean, this is all going on. So, I don't see, and we keep inviting these people over to our colleges, educating them and sending them back. It's insane. It's insane. There is so much wrong with our colleges. The indoctrination, but then this whole Saudi influence, the jihadi influence globally that's in colleges, the communist Chinese influence in colleges.
The Confucius Institute. And the only two senators that ever put any pressure on some of these universities about the Confucius Institutes, plural, is Cruz and Rubio. Isn't that fascinating?
Right. Well, yeah, Rubio's good on China. I think he's a little too overly sensitive. Look, the Jamal Khashoggi, how do you pronounce his name?
Jamal Khashoggi.
Khashoggi. Look, what that crown prince in Saudi Arabia is engaged in reforms and modernizations. He is. Now, he's got to do it very, very slowly because that's all the people will accept. But one of the things he has to do is, to the best of his ability, minimize the influence of the Muslim Brotherhood in Saudi Arabia.
And
Khashoggi was the Muslim Brotherhood stooge. Mm-hmm. So he dealt with him. Now, they deal with their problems a little less daintily than do we. So Khashoggi goes away, and Rubio's so myopically focused on, oh my God, he killed a journalist. Well, he wasn't a journalist.
No, that was a cover.
Muslim Brotherhood mouthpiece.
Exactly.
So Rubio, he's got his antenna up on foreign policy, but his receiver isn't always working.
Well, at least he is ringing the bell on some things Russia, and certainly on some things China.
Well, now again, I think he's wrong on the Russia thing. I mean, the joke now is since the fall of the Soviet Union, they're a gas station with a nation attached, and now that Trump's finally accessing our oil, their gas station isn't making any money anymore. So they're not really a threat. And to me, one of the biggest strategic losses of the last 2+ years was we should have been working with Russia or cozying up to Russia to get them to side with us against China. Because China is the problem, not Russia. And because of this stupid Trump-Russia collusion stupidity, he couldn't do that because it would look like...
Yeah.
It would feed the narrative of this stupid, non-existent collusion stuff. So that's a big loss because now you can look, Russia and China are doing more and more stuff together because China looked at it and said, okay, we'll partner with them, that's fine. And so thanks to domestic Democrat politics, we lost a real opportunity there.
And don't you find it kind of interesting that the other committee members on the Senate Foreign Relations and the Senate Intelligence, not one single Democrat, not one, either in the House or the Senate, has said one word about China?
Well, Feinstein's made millions of dollars.
Exactly.
And I bet you money she knew that 20-plus year spy was a spy.
Sure.
I mean, that was part of the trade-off, was having a Chinese staffer on her staff as she's the Democrat leader of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. I mean, this is insane. She should be in prison just for having this person on staff for 20 years and being criminally stupid and not realizing it if she didn't. It reminds me of that line from West Wing when the Republicans are investigating the Bartlett administration and the two young staffers. He goes, "I'm looking at this deposition. You get dangerously close to what do you call it when you lie under oath?
Perjury.
Perjury, because you dangerously close to perjury. I'd like to investigate you two for being stupid." And that's kind of like how I feel about Dianne Feinstein. So anyway, that's why. I mean, they've been throwing money around. This is part of the plan. They've been throwing money around D.C. and America for decades, and it
How
shuts
bad
people
of
up.
scandal? What kind of scandal would it be if we started to expel some Chinese diplomats from the West Coast?
Well, we have to come up with an official justification for doing so, which I don't think would be too hard, but I don't, it wouldn't be any more of a scandal than anything else that's a scandal. Everything Trump does is a scandal, which in a way helps, because if everything's a scandal, nothing's a scandal,
Right.
And so, and he knows this, and he's got this constant cacophony, which has got to be, I'm exhausted watching it. I can't imagine being the recipient of it. And, this constant barrage and assault of stupidity from all these people. And but it gives him room to operate. There's this one leftist woman on my Facebook. She's a Facebook friend. I've never met her. She's a hardcore leftist. She's an environmentalist all the way. She does that for a living. I don't know in what capacity. But anyway, she's a realistic, smart person. She is so angry at this Trump-Russia collusion thing because she knows it's total nonsense. But what she's pissed about is all the other things we should be mad at Trump at, but we're not because we're mad at him for Trump-Russia collusion. Which, that's an interesting leftist perspective. And she's right. He's getting a lot of stuff done.
In spite
it's
of
like the magician. You're watching the right hand, and he's doing the trick with his left hand. It's misdirection.
Well,
but it's not Trump's fault. They're the ones setting up the misdirection. He's just walking in and doing what he wants to do.
As long as we're in this trade negotiations, trade/war negotiations with China, I'm thinking that is probably one of the reasons that we're not taking any more aggressive diplomatic anti-China activities, especially when we just indicted.
In Trump's defense, I always thought, as I defended Trump, and of course we're now being proven correct, in his trade wars, I said China's going to be last for a bunch of reasons.
Yeah, I get that.
One, they'll hold out longer than anybody else. And two, he's folding in a bunch of non-trade related things into the negotiations with China. There's North Korea, for example.
Exactly.
He's pardon the use of the phrase, he's trading off gaining ground on our trade relationship with China in exchange for gaining ground on nuclear North Korea.
Correct.
So he's making that, and I think his math is correct. I think corralling North Korea is more important than getting some of the trade barriers removed from our entryway into China. I think he's made the right calculations in that regard. So he's got that going on. And I think that has been part of the negotiation thinking with regard to China. He's got non-trade things that he has to deal with that are more important than trade things.
Which is the reason I think that they're reticent and really holding back on being more aggressive with the nasty things that China is doing against the United States.
There's a cultural aspect to this too. The Asians always worry about saving face. You can't talk about Xi Jinping the way you talk about, Macron in France. You can't. Being respected. Respect is very important in Asia.
Correct.
We say it's important here, but not like it is there.
Correct.
And so he understands this. He's been there 9,000 times on business. So Xi Jinping, he's my buddy. He's a great guy. Blah blah blah. Plus, if you beat the guy up in public, you can't even sit down with the person. And even if you do, after you've beaten him up in public, what's he going to concede in private? What you have to do is you have to publicly praise him and then privately admonish him.
Well, I think we have some interesting things that will happen after the midterms with regard to China. They're clearly, I think we ought to go on a tweet up with Don Lemon and have him replace the white man with China. But
meanwhile, he's dating a white man. He is. Yeah. They may be married. I don't know, but he's dating a white man. I mean, I wonder what he thought when he saw that.
Well, I appreciate your insight, and I'm happy to see that you and Bill Gertz and, those over at National Review are picking up this baton when it comes to China. I think that we're leaving an awful lot unsaid, and it's important that, we kind of push the matter. And good job on the piece with the Department of Defense that you did over at Red State. It is a little on the snarky side, but I understand the snarkiness because we're just not making good decisions here with the Department of Defense. If they want some protections, then go knock on the door at the National Security Agency. Yeah,
we have a giant server farm in Utah. Why can't we use that?
That's kind of my point. Ladies and gentlemen, big round of applause to Seton Motley, and thank you for being with us, and there's more coming your way, so make sure you stay with us.
We're about to join Don Newen, co-host of Cowboy Logic Radio, and Denise Simon, host of the Denise Simon Experience, for a weekly situation report, or SITREP. 18 hours a day, Denise Simon lives her life as an intel analyst. 18 hours a day, Don Newen lives his life in the world of rock and roll. 1 hour each day, Newen receives a daily SITREP from Simon. Welcome to the Drive Time Situation Report. Fasten your seatbelt. You're now in Don Newen's car, and he is calling in for his SITREP.
Check the Talk America Radio schedules for showtimes at talkamericaradio.us.
Let me talk to you, black people. When you vote for blacks and put them in office under the banner of the Democrat Party, please explain to me what black people get as a result. This was not a nap that we have been taking. We are in a coma. You know what the interesting thing about pensions is? That's today's money given to people who ain't doing nothing for you today. Get off that black Democrat tit that they've been sucking on. Your country is being stolen from you, and the promise is being stolen from your children, and they're telling you it's all right while the rest of the world is trying to lap us. Well, why are we doing so poorly? 2 words: teachers' unions. Are you kidding me?
Black Man Thinking, Monday nights, 9 p.m. Hi, this is Donna Fiducia, co-host of Cowboy Logic Radio. For 28 years, I was in the mainstream media, most recently as an anchor at the Fox News Channel. No more. Ladies and gentlemen, the mainstream media has completely failed the American people. Radio networks like Talk America Radio will not fail you. Radio shows like Cowboy Logic Radio will not fail you. Check out the entire roster of over 60 weekly radio shows by visiting talkamericaradio.us. That's talkamericaradio.us.
TalkAmericaRadio.us.
Can we do it again? I like it.
And thanks, ladies and gentlemen, for hanging with us here on the Denise Simon Experience. A 77-year-old Navy vet goes to jail for 18 months. Did that really happen? Well, my buddy over here, Tony Francois with Pacific Legal Foundation, has been kind enough to join us on the Denise Simon Experience and explain this. Oh, God, Tony, it's a ridiculous case. It's ridiculous.
I do tend to agree, but it is real, and this is the kind of thing that can actually happen in the United States of America today. So we at Pacific Legal Foundation represent Joe Robertson, who's as you mentioned, an elderly Navy vet. He's from Montana, and he lives up in the woods outside of town, outside of a little town called Basin, Montana, which is a little town down the road from a fairly small town called Helena, Montana. That
I've been there.
Folks picture, yeah, no, it's beautiful country. He and his wife live on some private property up the very edge of a national forest outside of town, and they actually for several years ran a contracting business that supported firefighting agencies. They owned a water truck that they would then have a contract to support firefighting efforts in the area. And they themselves live in an area that's increasingly prone to forest fire, and like all of us, they've observed the increasing intensity and frequency of forest fires in the Mountain West region, and I don't need to probably go over the horrors that are going on in California right now with
awful, just awful.
With out of control forest fires. It's just it's horrifying. So Joe and his wife Carrie were reasonably concerned to take whatever action they could to provide for their safety of their property, obviously, but their own safety living out there in the woods. And one of the challenges they face is that there's a little running through a clearing near their property. There's a little streamlet or a trickle of water that flows through this clearing, but there's not really any developed water source there. This little streamlet is certainly not enough to fill up firefighting trucks or make a serious impact. So what he did was he used some equipment to dig some ponds in the trace of this little channel. And so the ponds then filled up with water, and then the water flowed over the end of the bottom pond and back into the channel. But the ponds created this supply of water that trucks could back into, pump out, fill up to fight fire if needed. And this was a good common sense measure to increase the safety of his property and he and his wife, and it just seems like what's not to love. Well, so The other shoe drops when an agent of the EPA comes out and announces that this little streamlet, and let me try to paint a picture. You're 40 miles away from the nearest actually navigable river, the Jefferson River, which is many miles south of where Joe lives. And this streamlet running through this clearing near your house is a foot wide. It's about a foot wide. It's about a foot deep. You would step over it frequently without noticing it was there. I mean, you'd have to work on it to step right in it, right? It's that small. Got 2 to 3 garden hoses worth of flow in it, so it's not a lot of water. So with that background, of course, the Environmental Protection Agency shows up, takes a look at the ponds and said, hey, this little unnamed channel, that's a federally protected, quote, navigable water. And you had to have the United States Army's permission, to build these ponds. And not having obtained that permission in advance, they indicted Joe for violations of the Clean Water Act. He was ultimately convicted and then sentenced to prison for 18 months, a term which he finished about a year ago. So he got out in early December of 2017. But in the meanwhile, he's been appealing his conviction, first to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals in San Francisco. That was unsuccessful. And so last week, Pacific Legal Foundation, as his attorneys, we filed a request with the Supreme Court asking them to hear his case and reverse his convictions. And the specific thing we're really asking the court to focus on is, how is anyone to know that when you're living in the remote woods and up in the hills and you got this foot wide trickle of water running past you, that the EPA thinks that's the federal government's protected navigable waters, and the Army's going to want to issue its permission before you do anything with it, because the ordinary citizen is not going to look at that and think, oh boy, that looks like something I need to go talk to the Army about before I drop a shovel full of dirt in it.
All right, Tony. Here's the deal. Does the EPA have some kind of drone surveillance are they spying on citizens that certainly in 2012 or 2013 or 2014 or 2015 or 2016, how would the EPA know who Joe Robertson was and that this little teeny pond existed?
Well, so there's a couple things that go on. First of all, so I'm familiar with this, for example, in California. The Water Rates Permitting Agency has become very aggressive in the state of California in demanding that people have permits or prove that they don't need a permit for stock watering ponds and irrigation ponds on their property. They just use Google Earth aerial photography to look for ponds that are there one year and weren't there the year before, things like that. So that's, I know, used as a surveillance technique. People's neighbors call the agency and say, hey, my neighbor is up to no good. They're doing something in the creek next door. Occasionally people this happened, for example, in our representation of Duarte Nursery the last several years. And an Army Corps enforcement official happened to be driving by Duarte Nursery's farmland and observed them farming it and came to the snap decision that was illegal. So, these kinds of things do happen. It does kind of leave you wondering if there aren't better and more important things to do than chasing the waterways all the way up to the tops of the watersheds, to see who might be trying to protect their home from fire
and providing the fire department a service. But let me ask this question, and I am sometimes over on Google Earth myself, and if you look at Google Earth, at the bottom of it, the data comes from the U.S. Department of the Navy and then there's also the geospatial. So the Department of the Navy and geospatial, which is, there for satellites and all these other kinds of things so we can track, North Korea's missile program. Obviously, the EPA is allowed access to that data that it gets over there on Google Earth, or Google Earth is allowing it or getting access and then allowing it over to the EPA to go after a 77-year-old Navy vet who is providing a service essentially to the fire department. Did that pretty well sum it up?
Well, they definitely, for example, trying to prove that this foot-wide trickle was navigable. And I mean, I say that sort of tongue-in-cheek. I mean, basically what they say is when you look at the statute and it says navigable waters, it doesn't really mean navigable. It means navigable plus anything that ever flows into navigable waters, even though that's not actually in the statute. So they actually, in Joe's trial, did an animated video, a Google Earth fly-through that started up at this clearing where Joe built the ponds, and then followed the water all the way downstream to the Jefferson River. I mean, there's some inherent difficulties with this, one of which is that, when you get down to actually the resolution of the photography, it can be hard to tell what you're actually looking at. More fundamentally, though, the laws require on-site inspection and verification of the condition of, the characteristics of particular waterways, even under the Army Corps and EPA regulations, to determine whether they are covered by the Clean Water Act or not. You can't do that with any finality just by looking at aerial photography and satellite photos and maps and things like that. The agencies use those resources as initial screening tools, but they're not allowed to make a final decision about whether any particular property has protected wetlands on it or protected waterway without doing an on-site examination. And what they tend to do, though, is they'll drive up, take a look around, and say, yeah, we say this is jurisdictional. We say this is ours. And if you want them to change their mind, or you're doubtful that it is under their jurisdiction, you got to pay the tens to hundreds of thousands of dollars in consulting costs to hire somebody with specialized expertise who's going to come out and do a bunch of studies on your property, and then is going to have to go and basically do a negotiation with the agency over whether or not this is covered or not. Now, stop and think about this. This is all to figure out whether, you putting a shovel full of dirt in that is a crime or not. And so this is a big part of what we're asking the Supreme Court in this case is, is it even constitutional? Is there even the minimum amount of constitutional notice required to prosecute somebody when the statute is completely vague about what is and what isn't covered? And there's not really any objective standard that, for example, everybody in the agency would agree this is covered and that isn't. It's pretty well documented that you can go to different offices around the country of either the EPA or the Army Corps. You can even get differences of opinion within a given office. Mm-hmm. Oh, I say that is covered, that isn't covered. That the file gets handed to somebody else and they got a different opinion about whether the features on your property are covered. It's a mess, and it just baffles me how the government can prosecute somebody and put them in prison over something that they themselves have a tough time figuring out whether it applies or not.
How long have the Robertsons owned this property?
Several decades. I want to say about 30 years.
And so I would say that did they ever get some kind of a notice? Any of these landowners, like the Mr. Robertsons across the country, do they get these notices that says, hey, you can't dig, you can't tamper, you can't do anything with what could possibly be deemed as navigable waters on your property, unless you go through these procedures. That would be question one. And question two, did they ever give him an opportunity to cure?
Well, so on the first one, this had not been previously. So let me take a quick step back. The Army Corps does this process called jurisdictional determinations, where they will give their formal opinion. Is this mud puddle a federally protected navigable water or not? And that's a kind of a drawn-out process that involves this level of cost and time that I mentioned earlier. Very, very expensive, very time-consuming. And at the end of it, if you don't like their answer, you may have to sue them to try to overturn that. But at least once you go through that process, you have their formal determination that this is or isn't navigable waters. That was not done here, and that's one of those questions. I think it's a fair question. How can you prosecute somebody when the agencies haven't gone through the formal determination of whether they even think that this is navigable waters, as they use the term or misuse the term? But you're on the risk of becoming an involuntary guest to the federal government if you guess their answer wrong.
And so in his trial, he was indicted, but he never got a chance to cure. Was there an option to cure? In other words, hey, Mr. Robinson, go throw some mud or dirt back in this little 1x1 ditch that you dug.
Well, one of the cruel jokes to all of this is that in addition to his 1.5 years in prison, he was sentenced to $130,000 in restitution, which is what the government witnesses claimed is the cost of restoring the site. And so this is another aspect of this, is that I think you rightly intuit that if there's harm here, it should be pretty easy to just kind of get some equipment out and bulldoze in the ponds and then get another piece of equipment through there and retrace the channel through it, and let's all go home, right? And yet the government claimed that these were these really valuable special wetlands that would be enormously expensive to restore. And so rather than letting nature take its course, so this poor guy, he's out of prison now, but his Social Security check is getting dunned, and he's got this enormous obligation to the federal government, again, over something that nobody would have walked across this clearing and thought, this looks like Army territory to me. I'd better go get their permission to do it.
Which Army? Is this a Lewis and Clark kind of thing, or what? Which Army?
Well, so there's a branch of the United States Army called the Army Corps of Engineers.
Oh, that Army, okay.
Yeah, the United States Army. And it's interesting how, when we talk about the combat engineers, they're obviously part of the Army, and they do great work all over the world. Don't take me wrong. I served in the Army. I'm very proud of them.
Yes, you did. Yes.
But then there's this civilian agency that sits within the Army that does all this regulatory permitting. And they get referred to as the Army Corps or the Corps of Engineers, and but every now and then I think it's worthwhile reminding people what we're talking about here is the United States Army. You need their permission to meddle with foot-wide, foot-deep, unnamed channels 40 miles from the nearest national.
All right, Tony, ladies and gentlemen, we're speaking with Tony Francois at Pacific Legal Foundation. I'm going to really throw some sand in the gears with this next question. Poor Mr. Robertson. Can he? I don't even know how to really ask this question, but you're smart enough to know what I'm really trying to ask is, can he countersue, or is he prohibited from countersuit under the Ferris Doctrine?
Well, so in general, you can, as a criminal defendant, you can bring malicious prosecution claims. Here's the problem with trying to pursue something like that, which is, malicious prosecution claim, you're not going to be able to prove that unless you can demonstrate that the prosecutor lacked even any probable cause to bring the case. Well, the difficulty with these vague statutes is that there's always probable cause. Any set of facts, an expert can step up and say, oh, that is navigable waters, and another expert can take the same facts and say, no, it's not. And, so it all, and that derives from the fact that you get this vague statute that the agencies have then expanded, out to, the outer boundaries of their power, in which the Supreme Court, unfortunately, instead of putting some clear limits on, issued a very confusing, divided decision about 12 years ago. Four of the justices saying, well, it means this, and another one of the justices saying, well, it means that. And, so you got the agencies out there saying, well, we could use either of those theories. And, the theories, I don't want to overcomplicate it. The most important thing that the Supreme Court decision says, the Rapanos decision from 2006, is the act covers more than just traditionally navigable waters, but it doesn't cover all waters. And how you know how far upstream or how small or how remote your particular water is before it's no longer covered by the act is anybody's guess. And that's the basic problem, is most people are going to read, if they read the statute, you're accountable for what the law says, whether you've read it or not. But most people are going to look at the words navigable waters and think, well, that probably means down there where they float boats. It certainly doesn't mean up here in the woods where, my shoe is too big to stick in this hole in the ground.
I mean, don't you need a dock someplace close if you've got navigable waters and you've got some kind of watercraft that you need a dock? Something bigger than a frog sits on?
Yeah, no, that's going to be most people's ordinary interpretation of that term. And, at the very outset of the Clean Water Act, that's what the Army Corps said it meant. Traditionally navigable in the sense that it supports or can support waterborne commerce. And yet, the agencies have pushed it beyond that limit. The courts so far have allowed them to do that. But in a way, if the court simply said it covers all water, that would be onerous. I think there's clear constitutional problems with saying that the federal government can regulate all water wherever it's found. That exceeds their enumerated powers. But at least everybody would know what the rule is. In the other hand, so what they've said is, well, it covers more than just navigable waters, but we just don't know how much more.
And we don't know how to define it.
Right.
Yeah, all right.
Yeah.
So has the Supreme Court accepted this case?
Not yet. We expect to hear possibly as early as January whether they'll take it. The government has till about December 10th to respond to our petition. But we're optimistic about it. We think this is a very good opportunity for the Supreme Court to clarify this area of the law, and certainly to reverse Joe's convictions.
And so has anybody marched over to the White House and handed this case to Trump and just said, pardon this cat and give him his money back?
So pardons are a process that usually does not even start until the criminal defendants
make application
appeals are exhausted.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a step that has to be taken before, in the normal course of business, the Justice Department and then the White House counsel's office would entertain a pardon request.
I would actually like to see this before the Supreme Court because, we can't even begin to count how many cases there really are. I know that Pacific Legal's had handled many of them when it comes to these little gallons of water that the government somehow feels an obligation to either one, own, or two, protect. So there needs to be a full-blown clarification and a challenge back to Congress that says your Clean Water Act needs to be amended, blown up, or clarified, or defined, or something. So, I mean, we really, going through the Supreme Court's one thing, but there's still congressional activity that needs to happen on this, correct?
I think that is correct. Interestingly enough, back in the Rapanos decision in 2006, some members of the court said, it's on the agencies to issue new regulations that would clear this up. But within not so many years after that, in the more recent Supreme Court cases on the Clean Water Act, on more kind of procedural issues like the Sackett case, members of the Supreme Court, Justice Alito in particular, have said this is Congress's fault. There's no way to issue a regulation that would, constitutionally clarify this, because there's no guidance from Congress. There is nothing in the statute that would tell you where this stops. And so that's a significant problem. I know Congress has confronted this a couple of times, but gridlock has prevailed. The result, though, has been of the gridlock in Congress has been to let the agencies continue doing what they want to do, which is everything. So I do think that if the Supreme Court were to take this case and impose either rule that the act in terms of where it applies is unconstitutionally vague, void for vagueness, that would certainly force Congress to take clear action.
Real action.
Or it could impose a constitutionally valid, clear and reasonable limit
language
of what navigable waters means. That could allow everything to move forward in a more orderly manner. But ultimately, this is the kind of thing that, the Clean Water Act's not the only area where Congress has done this. They thump their chests for passing these high-minded, grand-sounding statutes that, tell an agency to go forth and do good. And then the agency goes and does whatever it wants. And some people in Congress say, yeah, that's great. And others in Congress say, harump, found the podium. But they never take responsibility as Congress to clarify the law, to modify it appropriately, and to make sure that the executive branch is doing what the law requires.
Ladies and gentlemen, we've been speaking with Tony Francois at Pacific Legal. Mr. Tony, thank you so much for describing this, and I'm going to be checking with you to see where the Supreme Court is on this. In the meantime, ladies and gentlemen, very happy that you were with us, and we'll see you again very soon.